Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of RAI and ONDC. Today, we are going to talk about a digital commerce revolution, how we can become a part of India's digital commerce revolution, and what is ONDC and what is this project all about. Just to begin with, a one-liner introduction about ONDC. ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce, is a market-led initiative aimed at enabling interoperability in digital commerce. Based on the principles of openness, it aims to enable unbundling digital commerce, democratizing digital commerce, and unlock value for all parts of digital commerce, as well as enable innovation to unlock the next chapter of digital commerce. Today, we have gathered here for this masterclass to enable deeper adoption and penetration of digital commerce. Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade has been championing building the foundation of ONDC with a vision to unlock an additional $35 billion GMV and add 90 million users to the digital ecosystem. ONDC is an opportunity to reimagine digital commerce in India. With this introduction, I would like to invite RAI CEO, Mr. Kumar Rajagopalan, to welcome and do the opening address. Kumar, please.
Thank you, Hitesh, and good morning and a namaste to all of you. This is one of those days where each one of us are going to add some more value to ourselves and going to add value to the entire market. It's a great day because Sri Koshy I had requested him whether he can do a kind of a webinar for all of us and also take up questions. So he and his team consented. This is something that's going to help all of us in retail. It's also something that's been the dream of DPIIT. And we've normally been seeing that when something is taken up at a government level, it has a much better momentum to take things forward. We are lucky that we've got a very supportive industry there, ministry there, and we are lucky that something like this is happening because all of us could get together to create something which is unique to the world, not just unique to India, but unique to the world. Without much ado and without taking away the thunder from Koshy and his team, I think I'll end this by once more thanking Koshy for the time that he's taken for this initiative and the kind of work that they are putting in. They are putting in a lot of time and efforts to make this a truth for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kumar. With this, I would like to now introduce Mr. Koshy, who is the CEO of ONDC, and I would request him to give his opening remarks and also introduce the team. Over to you, Mr. Koshy.
Thank you, Kumar, and thank you, Hitesh, for arranging such a wonderful session. And I'm really excited. It is not that we have consented, it is that we are very proud to be here today with my team to share with you the story of what we are trying to do. As Kumar explained, this is a thought that got triggered in the Ministry of Commerce, DPIIT, in terms of how to make digital commerce more democratic and more and reaching more customers and more more suppliers and merchants and restaurant owners and the market players. Because what we have observed is that even though we've seen a tremendous growth in the digital commerce in the last few years, specifically after pandemic, but still the market share of digital commerce is in single digits. The participation of the industry as a whole is limited to only, if I just use the word, privileged few compared to the large cross-section. And the reach is only to fewer pin codes or geographical areas and so on and so forth. So the idea was, how do we make it more participative? It is not, as somebody will say, it is not to exclude anybody. It is an inclusive idea. We are trying to bring as many participants as possible, as many industry players as possible to come together and do commerce between each other. and not just within small groups of silos or what do we call it. We have as a country demonstrated that we have the capacity to do such population scale problem, address such population scale problem with some fantastic solution. We saw that when we built up a national ID, which has now become a reference implementation for the whole world. UPI, saw humongous transformation in the payment system, where when our digital transaction used to be somewhere in the vicinity of 300 to 400 million in a month, has now reached 4.5 billion in a month, with a very broad-based participation, which is significantly increasing. So that's a reason that the thought process came that it should be something, we should do something similar in the commerce sector, which can have a very, very broad impact on the total economy. And but when this idea came, the thought was that it is not that you let this government set up another PSU and leave it to them. And because the government realized that commerce, you need to be agile, you should be able to attract the best of the talent, you should be able to think on their feet and come out with interesting solutions, provide hand-holding the people who need support, and encourage people who are the wherewithal to go by themselves. So all these things need humongous agility. So we decided that it should be done as a market initiative. Government encouraged as a stage one to look at large institutional entities to come together. And you would have heard in the newspaper that about 12 to 15 of the such large institutions have come together and is promoting ONDC as a company. And we expect the company will be up and running in a week's time. Then you will ask me, what are we doing if you don't even have the company? So the idea was that while that formality is going on, we decided to, like a true startup, set up a project team to be incubated under Quality Council of India, which is an entity which is already operational. So we have come together, a very dedicated set of people have come together to already get going. And you can see the team here. I am there with me. I have my colleagues Shireesh Joshi and Vibhor Jain and Supriyo Ghosh who are going to be presenting today. Supriyo and of course Sujith Nair is here. He is the CEO of Beckn Foundation, which is the underlying protocol that we are adopting, which is available in open source. We are adopting to create this open network. So the role of the ONDC in that way is going to be an enabler. If we call the network facilitating agency, what will it do is to sort of help the necessary technical rails to be in place, and extend a very strong supporting hand to all kinds of market players to help them integrate into the marketplace fast, and create a set of common rules for all of us to adhere to, and make it as machine readable as possible, and provide the support services which are common to everybody, like a trusted registry, a certification system, and so on and so forth. So that's the whole idea of what we are trying to do. And so we have already started this work in this direction. We have been working with a large, decent cohort of participants who are already in various stages of integration. Last week, we had a hackathon of about 5 entities who came together and demonstrated that the cross-sectoral transactions can successfully be done. That is from retail to logistics to from multiple companies. An integrated stitch deal happening. It is practically first of the kind in the world, and we are going to have a very grand hackathon in the coming 7th, 8th, and 9th. And we are hoping, we'll give you the more details. We are hoping that after having when you feel convinced and confident about what we are trying to achieve after a presentation, many of you from your company and your innovation team would be happy to be a part of the hackathon that is going to take place, which will give a hands-on experience for the people to sort of bring new ideas as a part of NDC, or even do a complete integration and achieve an integration probably in a matter of few days, which otherwise would have taken few weeks. So these are the kind of very aggressive agenda in which we as a team is working on, truly like a startup team. So I'm asking my colleagues to sort of take it forward from here and explain in detail for your merit what we are trying to do. And of course, we have all the relevant people here who would be happy to answer any questions or clarifications that you may have. Over to you, Shireesh.
And I'll just briefly turn my video. Is my video visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to say a quick hello to everyone, and then I'll turn it off so that there are no bandwidth issues. And I'm really delighted to be once again speaking with the RAI organization. I've had a chance to interact before, and it's always been very energizing. And today the topic is such that it gives me double the energy, one part topic and one part all the audience that I'm speaking with. So I look forward to taking you through what ONDC is all about in the next few minutes. We will cover a little bit about the protocol. I'm aware that the audience does include several senior technology people. So it will give you a little peek into the technological basis. And then we will wrap up by introducing the immediate next step, which is the Grand Hackathon. So let's move along. The main impetus for and really a success kind of goal for ONDC is to change the situation around e-commerce, where there is a very small representation. Majority of the retail sector is not digitally enabled. And despite last year's impetus given by the COVID-based behavior change that people are staying at home and ordering, despite that, the e-retail penetration is still in single-digit percentages, and even allowing for a growth this year, it would still be in single-digit percentages. The reach is also very limited. It's very big town, urban-centric, and e-commerce has not reached smaller towns and rural areas as much. That's not to say there aren't orderings taking place. There are, but the reach is still fairly limited. There are several reasons why the reach has been limited, and a few of the key ones that we are seeking to address in the design of ONDC are the following. One is the choices that are available for sellers to be online. So there are a few large platforms, and those remain the only choice if you want to access a large number of buyers. The second constraint is ability for retailers and merchants to set their own terms and conditions, and this becomes particularly difficult when it is independent small retailers versus large companies or people with large scale and strong warehousing on their own. Also, this changes from domain to domain. So when you get into time-sensitive products that have freshness component, etc., then terms and conditions related to that also become constraining. The next issue is around discoverability of buyers and sellers beyond the large platforms. So right now, the only option if you want to access large buyers or sellers is to be on platforms that have those numbers, and beyond that, there really is no opportunity for discoverability. Entities that attempt to create their own e-commerce website discover very quickly that building a site is one thing and attracting traffic and buyers is quite another. And finally, opportunity for small players to stitch the entire value chain. To put together a successful full e-com solution requires putting together everything from the buyer interface all the way through to the seller interface and logistics and payment and all the solutions in between. And it's not possible for many of the small players to try and attempt to do this on their own. The current models benefit from scale, and that's why you have a few scale players. But therefore, it also becomes a barrier to entry for small players to participate. So looking at these issues, ONDC was designed based on two related principles. The first principle was around unbundling of the components, and most importantly, the customer and seller acquisition efforts. So this reduces the go-to-market efforts where every entity does not need to do all the parts. So as long as you do your part, let's say you're a buyer application and you're bringing buyers to the platform and somebody else is bringing sellers to the platform, then your task is done. Or conversely, if you're a seller platform and you bring sellers to the ONDC network, somebody else is bringing buyers, again, the other half of your major task is done. So unbundling the components allows participants to come with their existing capabilities and join hands with others on the network to complete the solution. So one component is unbundling, and automatically it requires the second component, which is interoperability. Because if there has to be a seamless e-commerce delivery across different entities that are connected through the network, then the protocol that establishes interoperability between them needs to be smooth, clear, and well tested. And so these are the two principles around which ONDC has been formed, around the unbundling of the components and the interoperability. What this leads to is an important distinction versus the current platform approach versus what we're calling the network approach. In the platform approach, the buyers and sellers need to be on the same platform, and only then can they have a transaction with each other. Whereas in the network approach, no matter which platform a buyer or a seller is connected to, as long as they're also connected to the network with an open protocol, then they're able to interact with each other with a commerce-aware interaction and communication with each other, and allowing, therefore, value to flow from one to the other. The central network is not going to be a store of value, but just a flow of value, which allows value to move from both sides of the equation to the other. Making it a little bit more schematic. So the open network allows the shift from the centralized platform-based systems to interconnected actors. So in a platform, the only two entities really outside the platform are the buyer and seller, and everything else is being managed from within the platform. Whereas in a network approach, the buyer is separately connected through buyer applications to the network, seller similarly connected through a different set of applications to the same network, and the network allows interaction and allows searches to be delivered and catalogs to respond with product options, etc. So the entire e-commerce experience is deliverable through this open network process. The network protocol is based and built on the Beckn protocol, and later on in the presentation, we will walk you a little more detail into what that protocol is after the introduction of the ONDC concept is complete. This is yet another way of looking at the setup. And the middle dotted rectangle is what today exists inside a single platform. Right? So the buyer interface, the seller interface, the interaction between them, all of them reside within a single platform. Now in ONDC, we envisage buyers to be connected to the network through multiple buyer-side applications. So there won't be just one, there will be many buyer-side applications. And through that buyer-side application, a buyer can send the search to the network and receive responses and initiate and complete the transaction. Likewise, we anticipate multiple seller-side applications that will bring independent small stores or supermarkets or aggregators, as well as on the logistics side. So both the retail and logistics, the first two domains, will have applications that will bring them to the network. On the right, what you see are the services that ONDC will provide. So having a registry where all the seller and buyer applications are registered, the network policies, as many of them being machine readable as possible, the reputation ledger. So all these will be services that ONDC will provide. And the entire flow of e-com solution will take place between these entities. So the dotted spaces are what entirely rest within a single entity today, but now they will rest in different entities, and that's really the unbundling. What the open network also allows is interaction with other open networks that can share protocol. So for example, there is a possibility of interacting with the open credit enablement network, whereby small or medium enterprises looking to establish a certain scale of operations to avail of credit can have these networks talking to each other, and their history of transactions on the ONDC network can become the basis on which they can access credit. So in this fashion, as more and more open networks come into play, there is opportunity for them to interact with each other and benefit from each other and create services that may not have been possible on their own. Here is an illustrative case. This is not the only way a transaction can happen, but just an illustrative case that sort of sets up the potential kind of application for ONDC. So in this illustration, we have Paytm that has become a buyer application. And so a Paytm user called Vijay, when he wants to search for Atta, puts his search on the Paytm application. The Paytm application then checks the multi-domain network registry and identifies the retailer seller applications that have the catalogs that can respond to ATA. And based on the return to that query, two options are presented to Vijay. One is a standalone store called Gupta Kirana Store, which is offering the ATA for 50 rupees. And another is Nearshop, an aggregator which has behind it Modern Kirana Store that has offered it for 150 rupees, and this price includes delivery. So Vijay opts to place the ATA order through Gupta Kirana Store, which is without delivery option, and so now searches for a delivery service. And so now the gateway, in a similar fashion that it did for ATA, will search the multi-domain registry for sellers of logistic services between the Gupta Kirana Store location and Vijay's location. And let's say for illustration purposes, Dunzo offers that journey for 50 rupees and Goodbox for 70. And so Vijay selects Dunzo for delivery. And Vijay is told through the seller application that he can make the payment through UPI or cash on delivery. And he opts to make a 50 rupee payment through UPI for the ATA and another 50 rupees for the delivery via Dunzo. So this is an illustration of how the user experience has not changed. Entered the search for ATA, got served options, chose the option, then was presented options for delivery, chose the delivery mechanism, paid, checked out, and then would be served tracking information for keeping an eye on the delivery of the ATA he has ordered. So the user experience has not materially changed, but what has changed dramatically is that all of this has not come together from a single platform, but through multiple entities connected through an open network. Now, this is just one illustrative case study. That does not mean that in each instance that each buyer will have to necessarily make two steps, one for product, one for delivery. There could be cases where the delivery is, for example, built into the price. And so with just the selection of the product and the vendor, you've covered everything. Or there could be a single click options, like regular delivery, express delivery. You just click and it just becomes part of the checkout. So this is just one illustrative case to explain how the handshake between various entities can happen in the purchase process. Next slide. So given this structure, we anticipate a significant amount of value addition to all entities who will participate. On the buyer side, there's clearly going to be access to more sellers and therefore more choices. There would be opportunity for improved price discovery in the long term. And given the competition of the same buyer being able to access the purchase opportunity through multiple buyer interfaces, healthy competition between those buyer applications leading to enhanced customer experience and also significant innovation in wanting to woo those consumers. For sellers, likewise, it is opportunity to access more buyers and therefore greater opportunity for growth. The significantly higher discoverability for the businesses as well, given that there will be multiple entities that will be bringing these large number of buyers to the network. Opportunity to have autonomy in terms of how to be or on what terms to be digitally visible. So, for example, if let's say somebody chooses to only have prepaid orders and no cash on delivery, then you can declare that, and that will become the basis on which you can become visible. Lower cost of Sorry. Okay. Lower cost of doing business because now you're working with different entities bringing different components of e-commerce to the network, each operating at scale efficiencies and therefore passing that along to all the participants in that network. And provision for value chain services also to support business growth. So that's the opportunity for sellers. Besides buyers and sellers, there's also opportunity for technology platforms. And now technology platforms can also access growth from e-commerce by supporting customers on the buyer-seller applications, help reduce time to market or time to scale. They can focus on niche areas, consumer acquisition, seller acquisition. And in fact, when we get to the hackathon, we will share a couple of thoughts as to what could be just pure technological components that somebody could create that players on the ONDC e-commerce network can benefit from, as well as new opportunities for startups to drive innovation in the overall value chain. So opportunities for sellers, opportunity for buyers, and opportunities for technology platforms. We anticipate, and Koshy alluded to this, that pretty much every measure of e-commerce activity, we want to multiply rather than just simply grow as percentages. So really looking to nearly double the merchandise value, likewise coverage of retailers, nearly double, expanding the share of users, also likewise to almost double, and ditto with PIN code. So really looking to step change the scale of operations. And honestly, this will not be the end. So once we hit these milestones, and maybe not take even 5 years that we anticipate to reach them, then to set our sights on still higher levels, because with single digit penetrations, the headroom for growth is immense. And so ONDC has really been conceived as an enabler or a maker of the market for digital commerce by revolutionizing and democratizing the large scale participation for businesses and consumers. A few thoughts on what we are and what we are not. So ONDC is an open network. It's not an application. It's not a platform. Buyers and sellers will not directly interact with ONDC. It's a protocol that enables that interaction through an open network. ONDC is not a central intermediary. In fact, it eliminates the need for central intermediary, and various sellers and buyers can talk to each other through the open protocol. It's an enabler for e-commerce expansion. ONDC itself is not a medium to digitize businesses. That work will be done by seller applications or technology service providers, who will then help businesses become digitally complete and become visible to the network. But ONDC itself is only an enabler, as well as an enabler for broad-based innovation. And we are doing this not as a central entity that is just simply building a set of rules and just publishing them, but rather as a market and community-led initiative. And so all the businesses and startups who are engaged with us to come on ONDC, we have a very thriving community-based interaction with them on Slack channel, on weekly calls, where we share our thinking, we take our reactions, take their input and feedback, and are building our overall approach, our design, and our policy thinking based on that input. So we're not acting as a top-down regulator, but rather as a market and a community-led initiative. With this, we hope to cover one by one, add increasing number of domains. So it's starting with retail and logistics, but from retail, we can see wholesale getting added, maybe food delivery, tourism, travel, mobility. And so more and more domains can get added. And so the same buyer need not go to different applications or platforms for different needs. Right? So you might buy your grocery on one platform, you might buy your household items on another platform, you might do your hotel bookings on another, and flight bookings on yet another. So today we go to different domain specialist applications to be able to do various transactions, but with an open network idea, with a single interface, a buyer would be able to access all domains that he or she is interested in. We've got a tremendous amount of impetus and support from and sponsorship from the Ministry of Commerce. Shireesh Joshi, the Honorable Minister himself, believes in the power of ONDC to democratize digital commerce and move it to an open network model. And Anil Agarwal sir from DPIIT also is very excited and has also been a prime driver behind this initiative, and is looking to make this not just a successful India initiative, but actually put India on a global map as an e-commerce leader. We have a very diverse board that's been advising us and guiding us. They've brought us to where we are now, and we continue to look for their guidance. Many of these names, if not all, are familiar to all of you. And certainly, Kumar Rajagopalan has been a very, very close mentor and guide for us as a team. The momentum has really picked up in the last few months, although the thinking began sometime last year, but it was in the middle of 2021 that this advisory council was established and a leadership team was onboarded. And since then, established a plan for rollout, started an active engagement with the first cohort of early adopters. And earlier this month, we completed the first integration sprint where we tested the full end-to-end transaction between the various entities on the network using our protocol. These are the promoters and early investors in our company to be set up. You can see national and public sector banks, stock exchanges, development banks, as well as QCI and NPCI as entities. So a broad cross section. We've got clearances from their boards, and we have the funding we need to get started. We're preparing to go live sometime second half of January, and here are some of the names that are already engaged with us. Some of them were participants in that integration sprint and have completed the round testing, and so are much further along the way. And we look forward to increased participation in the upcoming hackathon in January that will enable many more partners to then become fully ready to go live. What are the roles for ONDC? 3 roles essentially. A developmental role to set up and sustain this open network and keep updating the technological solution that backs it, and to enable and evangelize a very wide scale participation by ecosystem players. Second is the network management role, to have key needed policies that enable the participants to interact and establish that code of conduct to the extent possible as machine readable policies. And finally, the service delivery role, which is to provide foundational services for managing the network, as well as potentially rolling out reference applications for buyers and sellers. So even as we have private entities that are developing their buyer and seller applications, to also make available reference ones for those who can't, for whatever reason, access those resources. So that's our mission, empowering India to lead the way in shaping the future of e-commerce globally. And I will pause here for questions before I hand over to Sujith and walk you through some essence of the protocol. Question from Ranjit on: does ONDC capture data and what kind? So first, the principle. And the principle really is whatever is required to ensure network service delivery and whatever is required for statutory purposes. And that will be the only data that will be kept. We will not be keeping detailed data. We are drawing up, and we will be sharing with all the network participants the specific details of what kind of data we will and will not keep. But those are the 2 principles guiding us. Seller data can be made available voluntarily. So the seller application will have a track record of what transactions have flown through for a particular seller. And should they choose to make that data available, then the seller application and the seller can agree and make that available. It's not an automatic access information. It will have to be volunteered by the entity.
And also, just adding one more dimension, probably many of you are aware of the DPA framework on the data sharing, where the owner of the data is a person whose data it is there, and it should only move from the consent. So those, the way all this network are working together is under this principle. So while we have no intention to sort of accumulate all the data and become the hoarder of the data and trying to take economic return out of that for the individual the ONDC or this network provider, that's not the idea. That's why probably that's why we have set this company as a Section 8 company. So while we have a broad participation of institutions, all of them have come together with an idea that it is going to be building up the rails. And the people like you who are engaged in the business should be using these rails for furthering your business interests and making it more economically relevant and viable. At the same time, respecting the idea of privacy and the confidentiality of the business information, and sharing of the information through, with appropriate consent mechanism in place. So that's the principle in which you're operating. And we will, Shireesh explained to you, we will be continuously evolving this network policies, and it will be implemented through a body. It will be sort of only after consultation of the representative from the larger community. So it is that way, and more a community enablement infrastructure, and not what you call profit maximizing entity as ONDC.
Shireesh, we have got, I think, around 8-10 questions. Yes. How do you propose? Should we, because you had laid out the agenda,
yes,
should we take the questions at the last, or you would like to answer all these currently?
I'm just looking at those questions.
Yeah.
So the onboarding, etc., we can talk at the end. Okay. The connection, registering with ONDC will be covered. Do's and do's, use cases, we're not covering today, but that will eventually, as we become live, those will get included. How can technology companies participate? I gave an introduction now. If there are any specific questions, we can take them at the end. Personalized basis for search. No, we do not envisage personalized transaction history being maintained by ONDC. But the buyer application, seller applications may choose to, but ONDC will not. Okay, more questions on the registration process. So we'll come back to the registration next steps. Let me hand over to Sujith, who will walk through the protocol, and then we will then move to the explanation of the hackathon and the questions.
Okay. Hitesh, if you find any questions not properly answered while you're skimming through, just we can sort of at the end of it, you can take one by one and we can crack it. We don't want to leave without answering any specific questions. Yeah.
Sure. In fact, the way the questions are coming in and message also I'm receiving is, I think this is just the first interaction the way I see it. We may have many couple of more interactions going ahead in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, sure. Just 1 second. This is Kumar. I think since people have started posting a lot of questions, firstly, thank you for everybody who's posting the questions. I think it's important for all of us to be making it interactive. I would urge this as a method for everybody. Whoever has got some questions, do not get worried. Even if it's a bit of a question mark in your mind, feel free to post all the chats. All of them may not get answered immediately, but most of them will definitely get answered, because I see a lot of patterns in the way the questions are emerging. But it is meant to be interactive. So my request to everybody on this is, do post your questions. Many of them will get answered, but we'll keep all of them as the Q&A at the end, so that it becomes easy and people feel that they're getting addressed nicely. And we'll also take back a lot of inputs as a methodology for the team to work on. So thank you. So this is my method of seeking everybody to post the questions on the chat board.
I'm just looking at Abhishek's question because it is very relevant to what some other question that came. He said, if there is a non-e-commerce seller, how can he come in? Is there a panel that is there? The answer I will say in two ways. One is, there are many entities who are trying to set up the seller platforms and onboard other sellers who may not want to set up their own IT infrastructure. And there again, we are seeing two kinds of requests. One is they become an aggregator, wherein they become the seller on record. And some cases we're finding that they become a sort of white labeled application for the sellers. So, coming back to the earlier question about what is a possibility of technology service providers, that is, in fact, some of the technology service providers have already started developing such standard solutions, either to act as an aggregator or act as a white label solutions to work with the broader cross-section of sellers. So, in fact, what we will be doing as ONDC is, like the big guys can come by themselves, we will have a separate team who will be looking at this issue of bringing, enabling large cross-section of people to get their, data digitized, provide support and guidance to get their data digitized, and also to be integrated with ONDC. In fact, one of the hackathon challenges that we have provided in the coming hackathon is for somebody to come out with an interesting solution which can be made broad-based available to allow small sellers to make their catalog digitally visible. So these are the way we are providing. Anyway, I'm asking Sujith to give a little more explanation on the protocol side, because many of you are coming from a very strong technology background as a CTOs and CIOs, and then we can take up any technical or business related questions as the time comes. Thank you.
Koshy sir, there is one question which has been asked, and we can answer it later also. Will the existing marketplaces be forced to connect and expose their customers and sellers to ONDC?
I can answer that now. If you ask me, is there a legal mandate as of now? No, we have no intention to bring any legal mandate. But we certainly do believe that it may not be the legal mandate, but they will become a market reality for many of these large players to participate, because we already have some of the discussion with some of them, because then they realize that by not participating, they are limiting their competitiveness, their participation from the sellers and buyers. Because if you look at even for the sellers today, if I just take an example, when there are only limited large platforms, for the sellers, either they have to join those platforms, even if they or if they want to their own system, they do not have the wherewithal, because they don't know how to get the buyers, they don't know how to get the logistics and all of them. Now, tomorrow, when all these services are available as microservices or independent services which can be stitched together, you will see many more options to the sellers, and similarly many more options to the buyer. So we believe that in a short period of time, existing platform players may also find it relevant to be integrated. We saw a similar kind of thing even in the financial sector when the UPI as an idea was launched. There are many of the existing players, including PSU banks, who are not wanting to be participated. But then they realize that they are missing out something, they can join. So we believe that the pure, the very essence of the model and the very model, the way in which model will grow, will make it make the incentive so strong for them to join, not because an executive fiat, is our belief, and that's how we are proceeding.
Okay, Koshy sir. Now we'll move on to Sujith to carry on with the presentation, next part of it. Over to you, Sujith, please.
Thank you, Hitesh. Thank you, everyone who spoke before me, and thank you all for joining in. I'm Sujith Nair. Just as a quick introduction before I get on with the few messages that I wanted to convey today. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Beckn Foundation. It's a not-for-profit entity. Our kind of existence today is largely to drive an effort, initiate and drive an effort around this whole open digital commons. So we came up with this idea of creating a non-code, simply a set of specifications as a way to engage marketplaces, digital ecosystem to come together and collectively achieve something. The principles are pretty much thinking behind what you see in UPI, internet, and other things as a basic idea of using open interoperable specifications to make digital ecosystems interoperable. This was an effort that started sometime in 2018. And I think in the last 2 to 3 years, we managed to put together the first set of specifications as a protocol. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But today, as we speak, between the protocol now has an active community of developers and a whole lot of market players volunteering to build on this specification. So a foundation is just sort of the initial author and sort of the initial donor to this effort. But otherwise today it's a community that's getting built as we speak, which is kind of contributing to the specifications and its evolutions as it has in the last 2-3 years, and continue to do that going forward. The idea is to not hinge on any particular form or way of technology. It is completely a semantic specification that is commerce aware, and idea is not to be tied up to any form of technology. And we know how the technologies are evolving, so we're trying to keep it agnostic of technology, which essentially means you can use this protocol on any form of technology on the end user side as platforms, or also in the medium. It could be on the internet or probably even on blockchain if somebody wants to do that. So it's pretty much a semantic specification collection that is published as open source under Creative Commons license. So that's a bit about Beckn, and what exactly does Beckn do is something that I can talk about in the subsequent slides. So I just spoke about this. I think when we started off as an initiative at the foundation, the idea was to probably limit ourselves to thinking about how do we do that for a sector that's probably not related to the conversation today here, which is urban mobility. But as we were trying to solve for mobility, we realized that the hidden truth of how a typical order life cycle works in a commerce environment outside of mobility too. So we could quickly abstract and publish the specification. So while the first specification of Beckn was launched on October 31st, to be precise, of 2019, we could launch a more universal protocol specification that caters to pretty much all things commerce to the extent that we can see by April 2020. And since April 2020, we have been seeing a fantastic collection of community participants, volunteering market participants coming together. You can hear of names like Dunzo, Delivery, all of them joining and saying, hey, is this something that we can put together, especially given the pandemic scenario? And they're all contributing to its evolution and adoption. And that's how we could create a first network like ONDC, a smaller scale a network that got launched in Bangalore for the delivery platforms to be discoverable on any buyer platform. That happened in November 2020. And as we speak, July this year, we had another network go live for mobility, which was probably where the story began. In Kochi, in the city of Kochi, we have launched what is called as an open mobility network, Kochi Open Mobility Network, that was there. And as Shireesh alluded to, the conversation for ONDC, given its, of course, the nationwide population scale ambition, did start off sometime last year. And since June, we have been accelerating at a phenomenal pace thanks to the fantastic leadership team that is there on the panel today. Now, coming to the specifics of the protocol, and I'll not take too much of time here. I think while Shireesh spoke about it, I think the essential idea of the premise of why the protocol was put in place was to kind of look at this, revisit this idea, this premise that today a buyer and seller, if they have to do anything online, they need to be on the same platform. I need to be using the consumer app as a consumer. The seller needs to be onboarded onto the same platform to discover each other and have the entire conversation between themselves, the entire order lifecycle, right from search to adding it to the cart, placing the order, tracking it, the fulfillment part of it, and then the post-fulfillment like returns, cancellation, consumer complaints, and what have you, right? So the entire order lifecycle gets played out in silos in each platform. And we all know that there is no one universal platform that cater to all the requirements of a particular seller and across all users and demographics across the country. So there's no universality of platforms by the very design of this model. You have fantastic, maybe retail apps, but reaching out to some sort of customers. There are a lot of people who probably don't even know such platforms exist. And you cannot have one platform, multiple sectors, from logistics to mobility to groceries to restaurants and others. So given that platforms are today operating in silo, given that they cannot be a universality, there is, of course, this challenge of penetration with just about under 10% penetration of e-commerce today. We need to look at the model differently. And the other thing that I think Shireesh spoke about was this idea that all the interactions are confined to that platform. And as a seller, and I want to distinguish the seller and the seller platform. The seller, I mean the actual retailer in case of a retailer, or a logistic provider, the guy who's probably owning the cost of the business of the inventory and all that. The warehouse provider, for example, if you go deeper into the value chain, all of them using either their own or someone else's digital platform, the seller app, and publishing its catalog of goods and services to be discoverable by the user on the other side. Now, this information kind of gets confined inside the platform, and all the history also gets confined to the platform. For some reason, let's say that if the seller wants to adopt another platform, either of his own or someone else, it becomes difficult for the entire historical intelligence in the credentials, the reputation that was got built on one platform can be made portable to other platforms. So store of value is not just about transaction history, but also the active credential history that somebody is building in terms of reputation and others, that also gets locked in one particular platform. But as a seller, if I need choice to kind of be able to publish my catalog and make myself discoverable and also make my credentials available as to how good a seller I am, how better I've been fulfilling some of the services online, then is it possible to convert this idea of platforms as a model and store of value as a construct to the next slide, please. The idea of an orchestration of the flow of value. Now, this is where the shift in thinking with a protocol happens, where instead of confined to one platform, you can now make the platforms talk to each other, probably unbundle them on the buyer and seller side, and allow for a massive market expansion. Number one, because we're operating in silos and each platform trying to grow the market on its own, you can now collectively, as a collective ecosystem, massively expand the market. And there's a live example in UPI today when what it has done for payments. Something similar could be avoided, provided there's a way for these platforms which are bringing the catalogs and the rules of business, terms of business of sellers onto their platform, and the buyers who are probably spending more time on the other platforms. We have, for example, some of the payment apps has 300 million customers spending time using more on their app than any of the customer or on the seller specific exclusive apps, right? So how do we make that connection possible? That's where the interoperability requirement kind of mandates the need for a protocol. Now, this model is not very radical if you look at it right from the origins of internet. Pretty much internet works like this. Internet is not a platform, network, of course, we all know that. And I think the closer example could be the emails itself. The fact that the sender and receiver could be on two different email platforms, not having to know each other's email platform and yet send and receive emails, that happens because there is an underlying interoperable protocol like SMTP, right? So how do we emulate that for commerce? Is the thinking behind the design of this protocol? Of course, you all must be wondering, commerce is far more nuanced, especially the entire order lifecycle. The grammar of the order lifecycle changes by sector, by the business model, by region, and so on and so forth. So how do we ensure universality of that kind of language, which allows this interoperable communication to happen? So that's where the protocol fits in place. Can I go to the next slide? Now, one of the things that we have done with the protocol, and this is the design kind of evolved as we progress since 2018, is to kind of make it a layered architecture. So Beckn protocol essentially is a collection of specifications. Beckn Foundation, of course, is not a network part. It does not have any runtime. It's just a specifications. The specification does the following. It defines a set of actions across the order lifecycle that emulates a shopping experience, a buyer's journey, like searching for an item, the discovery, adding it to the cart, getting the quote or getting a revised quote if you already purchased something and you probably have an offer to redeem, doing all of that, and then initiating checkout, placing the order. At the time of checkout, you want to define which payment method you want to use, like you use in your typical e-commerce app. Where do you want it to be delivered, by when? Some of those things. And the seller on the other side is able to interact with you and tell you, hey, this is, by the way, if you add another 5 items into the cart or for this particular value, I can give you an offer dynamically. How do you have that conversation? And the seller also kind of receives and confirms that order. And between the seller and buyer, there's an order confirmation and then the subsequent flow of fulfillment and post-fulfillment, right? Like offering a rating, canceling it, the RTO and all of that. So the protocol at the basic level, think of protocol as a layered architecture, and you'll find more details both on GitHub and on the Beckn protocol website, which was there in one of the previous slides. But think of it as a layered architecture. The first thing it does is to define this order lifecycle communication, a bunch of events, which are manifested as API specifications. So there are open APIs, a collection of open APIs, which kind of plays out this order lifecycle, and not in any particular sequence. You can call them in any sequence. On top of that, now inside these APIs, there are a set of messaging structures to actually communicate that you're searching for something, or the data structure or the schemas, as we call it. That's the second layer that comes in. So we have the core grammar of any typical order lifecycle built in as a core schema. What the protocol allows is, on top of this core schema, you can extend that core schema for a particular sector, like local retail, or specifically for say FMCG, or you want to extend that for mobility, or you want to extend that for telehealth in healthcare, or you want to extend that for say skills and jobs. So there's a universal core schema. On top of that, you can add sector-specific schemas. And that's the second layer in terms of schemas. The third layer is the whole ecosystem architecture, which talks about identifying the roles of the participants of the network, like a buyer app, a buyer platform, the seller platform. And there are a bunch of not intermediary, but bunch of router nodes called gateways as a construct, which allows for transmission of search. They're not an intermediary. They don't participate in the entire order lifecycle. They are there as a search utility, as Shireesh said, as a way to access who all are the seller platforms in the registry if you're a buyer app, and as a way to access the registries and routing. So there is, of course, gateways and registries as the other element. So there's an architecture, there's an ecosystem architecture that goes with it. On top of that, you have a bunch of things that we can do on this protocol, which is to kind of adopt machine readable policies. Shireesh did talk about it, and you're also seeing it here. How do you introduce some policies on top of it to make this entire ecosystem not just interact with each other, but also have a collective consensus-based policies to kind of make this network operate healthy, both whether it's on the business and the competition terms or the basic health of the network from the infrastructure, technology, and compliance terms. There could be a set of rules. So the protocol packs in these features as layers. One of the important other things that I think I did see some of the questions there, that between a buyer and seller app, as the order lifecycle gets placed down, and once the order is placed from a seller platform to a buyer platform, that order with the terms baked into the message schema of the order, you can actually have a dual digitally signed contract between the two platforms. So it kind of builds that extra element of trust and non-repudiation. And tomorrow, the fact that both of you agree to the terms, it makes it easy for them to address any sort of dispute that may come out tomorrow. It's actually, IT Act enabled dualistically signed contract. But the idea, the larger scheme of things, the conversations, the transactions are largely bilateral, which is between the buyer and seller app. But of course, for the initial part of search, where you need a gateway to search a registry and come back, largely the order lifecycle is always played between a pair, which is a buyer and a seller platform. It's bilateral. Which is a question that does ONDC capture data? The actual order transaction does not go through any other third party, including ONDC Limited as an entity. The transactions are largely between them. For the purposes of hygiene and others, of course, ONDC may expect you to report some abstracted, aggregated, anonymized data, not exactly on what orders you have placed, but generally for other purposes. But that's pretty much how the whole protocol enables the network to establish some kind of a way to a code of conduct decorum to exchange place or order transactions at each other, and also, kind of evolve. One of the important parts of this is the fact that you have this unbundling and interoperability built in. Think of the possibilities of experiences now that's possible with this whole protocol thing. Even I can stitch catalogs from multiple different providers, one from retail, one from mobility, and offer a unique experience as a buyer app to the end customer. So I can be probably ordering for a taxi or taking an Uber ride, and I can have a coffee delivered to the taxi, a little bit of a whimsical thinking here, but a coffee delivered to a moving taxi, because the buyer app is able to interact with the retail seller app. Buyer app is able to interact with the retail mobility app, like a Uber or an Ola or a local taxi, and then stitch an experience for the buyer. So buyer side onboarding is on the buyer platform, and they can play to and offer a rich experience on the buyer side without diminishing the autonomy of the seller side apps. So the seller platforms and the sellers have the autonomy to respond to the search. First of all, they will have access to the search. Nobody gets shortchanged on who is searching, and I don't get to see the copy of the search. One is the participation, and you have the autonomy to respond with your own terms. There's no standardization of terms that ONDC does. You can pack in your terms of doing business into your search response and the order terms and engage. And this, while you can continue to do the way you're doing today. You may have your own exclusive app where you have customers retained and you're interacting with them. Without stepping that, you can actually log into ONDC as well and publish your terms and catalogs at your own command and force multiply order acquisition. So that's pretty much how this is. I can go technical, more technical, maybe a separate session on this is something that we can do, but I'll probably stop here and see if there are any questions on the tech side before I hand it over back to Shireesh and others.
Can we take the questions now? Yeah. Sujith, there are a couple of questions for you.
Right.
In fact, can you read them or shall I read it out?
Yeah. So
you said that, and I'm just saying, Hitesh, if there is a technical question that we need to answer now, otherwise, Shireesh has some more thing about how to participate, and then probably we can have a detailed question answer session. Which will,
sure.
There's one question foundation, if I can take that up, Koshy.
Yeah. Now, Sujith, I would like, after you give the answer, I will also give the compliment to your answer from an ONDC point of view.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, I think Beckn Foundation is a privately funded organization. The co-founders is largely being Pramod Nandan Nilekani, Pramod Verma, and myself. The foundation is largely, think of it as a philanthropic fund. We are a Section 8 company. Our job is not to be a network participant or a provider of any services on the network. We only look at building digital commons as open set of specifications, which we are hoping that the market will voluntarily adopt based on whatever the merits of the specifications are. That's pretty much the idea behind having this foundation set up. Foundation is essentially about kind of being a protocol advocate, the idea of a protocol, not necessarily Beckn protocol. And the fact that we started off with the purpose of mobility and kind of almost like a happy accident, we discovered the larger, deeper truth of this. That's more of that. So we are completely only into specifications, creation, publishing it as open source. So none of the specifications are owned, so to speak, by the foundation. The specifications are published as open source and it's in GitHub and everybody can access it without even talking to the foundation. And foundation is just the initial author and kind of the angel donor to this effort. But protocol is fairly independent of the foundation, so to speak. And otherwise the foundation rises very small. So we are a team of 3-4 people as a full-time employees doing this. And that includes me.
Yeah, so Sujith, can you also share, now it's a very important point that they were asking is, share your idea of while you, the Beckn Foundation acted as a, catalyst or a starting point to develop this open source protocol, which is completely open source. And your effort in making a larger global community who will own it, so that even if tomorrow, quote unquote, Beckn Foundation shut shops and you go home, and this will not become an orphan that is lying unattended. And on the other side, people like us, ONDC, and the other networks we're already using, have decided to take this as a foundation and build our own right interfaces and work on it. So which gives us a complete freedom in that way. We are in no way, completely dependent on or locked into, if I just use the word, a protocol from a foundation. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
No, absolutely. I think when we were looking at large societal problems, and I spent a lot of time in mobility, we realized that today, most of the way ecosystem is evolving, it's evolving pretty much with market makers evolving in silos. Collectively, they're not able to expand the market in a significant way. And I felt that problem in a little bit of my roles that I was doing in mobility previously. So we looked around and said, is there one specification that is not rivalrous, kind of open, anybody can do? So we couldn't find any. And when we figured out that there's probably none that is available, which is agnostic of any particular form of service in mobility or in commerce, that's when we started this endeavor. And the idea was to always put the specifications and kind of get away make the way for a community to see if there is value. And I think a lot of this happens across the world. There is an open community effort. Somebody has to start, but then the community understands, recognizes it and starts adopting it, sees the problems in it, and then builds on it and evolves. So this is we just wanted to kickstart that process. And that's how we see us just as an angel author or a Genesis author and an angel donor to this effort. And the idea, as you said, we don't intend to, but the fact that it's Creative Commons open source, we don't really want to be controlling the specification. There is a governance that is already there, which is not just foundation, but other members who are participant already, because they've been working on this since 2000, I think some of them are working on since Jan 2020. So I think there's an active participation of these, and the contributors are all listed and acknowledged there. But the foundation was just want to kind of get this thing started. For who knows, we may actually shut down the foundation if there's enough adoption, because foundation probably has nothing to do with the evolution of Beckn protocol beyond a point. But till that time, I thought there's a need for people to understand, be aware, and think of ideas like this. And let there be even better protocols coming out. And nobody's saying Beckn protocol is the only best protocol. Let there be even the idea of protocol come back into the mainstream conversations. And
thank you.
That's how we support. Yeah.
Thank you, Shireesh. Take up on the other topics of how there are a lot of questions with respect to how people can integrate with ONDC and so on and so forth. Can we just go on the practical part?
Yes. So there are two kind of discussions to be had with ONDC, obviously related. One is, how do you become an ONDC participant? And when we say participant, we mean on either side, either on the buyer side or on the seller side, ones who brings the buyers and sellers who are outside in a recognizable form that they can interact with each other, right? So a buyer application or an interface, that could be an app, it could be a web page, it could be a messaging platform, it could be an IVR whereby a buyer can initiate a search that can get served on the network. So that's on the buyer side. Similarly, on the seller side, applications that digitize catalog and make them visible to the network and be able to respond to search queries that come. Now, there are four stages, if you will, that every entity needs to go through. Today, we are covering stage one for all of you, which is explaining what ONDC is all about, what it is aiming to achieve, and hopefully transmit our intense belief that this could be completely transformational for India and maybe even a model for the world, which will allow a huge amount of participation. And so if you've also kind of on the same page with us, then we move to the next stage, which is determining what role to play. And what role to play is one of those three, right? Either a buyer side, seller side, or a technical service provider. And I guess given the audience we are speaking with today, we are looking at essentially being on seller side or technical service provider. So once the role is clear, then you interact with our team and start doing the engineering needed to make whatever bridge between your existing business and business activities to be able to interact with the network. The end of that engineering process would be testing and completion that take you to the technical completion, based on which you go live and begin interacting. So these really are the steps. So write to us at team@ondc.org. Easy to remember email as well. And express your interest to join the network. And then we will help you and guide you to the next step. We have many resources. We have community calls, Slack channel, GitHub, where technical details are posted. So we will direct you to the appropriate resource and people to help you along. Yes, we will share this presentation, which contains links, contains our contacts. So you will be able to reach out to any of us, as well as to reach out to ONDC through the team email ID for taking this forward. Let me go to the top and just now scan the questions. How does the content and catalog be delivered? So there is a protocol by which a search is converted to identifying the kind of product to be searched for. And in fact, some of those things are subject of the innovation hackathon. So how do you take, for example, a phrase like blue denim jeans and recognize that denim jeans is a product category and blue is the color or a type to look at, and then be able to serve it accordingly? These will all be activities that will be done in the buyer side application. Likewise, on the seller side, there will be work to be done to convert products and inventory to a digitally visible catalog. We are using the standard government listed domains as a way of classifying the domains. And so as long as they're clearly linked with the appropriate domain, then the content will be able to speak to each other. There'll be more opportunity to discuss on the technical details and specifications when we get into interacting with you and into the engineering stage of this. We covered seller data for availability for lending. Then safety protocols. Sujith, you want to cover safety protocols on the technology side?
Sure. I think it's a quick response to that. Fundamentally, the protocol enables dual digital signing and encryption. So I think there's no third-party access to this data. It's a bilateral exchange between two parties. As two parties, two platforms, the buyer and seller platform. The interaction between the actual buyer and the buyer platform, the digital infrastructure and the seller platform, and the seller and the seller platform, the two ends of that are left to the platforms, whatever they are adopting today or they intend to adopt, they can do that. But when they intend to communicate on the network has a way of a registry-based registration. There's a subscription to that. There is you kind of have a public key infrastructure enabled through this registry for you to share your public keys, for others to have any information exchange with you as part of their order life cycle interactions. So all of that is built in, and from a privacy standpoint of view, Koshy did speak about the adoption of DPIIT and others, which is for the network participants at some point to think that between themselves and their tenants, which is the buyers or sellers on their respective platforms, what kind of a consent-based disclosure or dissemination of information would you want to enable? The protocol supports all of that. And the fact that the order terms and other things are baked into the transactions itself, it kind of establishes a fairly autonomous kind of a trust built in the interactions, and that becomes the basis also for any post-order interactions or grievance redressal or dispute settlement. So that's broadly how we are looking at the safety and trust part of the overall ONDC architecture.
Thanks, Sujit. Question from Kishore Reddy. How soon can retailers start onboarding? Right now, we already have, as I mentioned in the December sprint, a full round testing done. So we have now seller applications that are technically established to be able to interact with the buyer side and with logistics on our network. So you could work through that particular seller application, or you could work through your own or some other aggregator who's providing. Essentially, as soon as there is an application that can bridge the connection between the network, which is a complete digital interaction and exchange, with the physical world of where the goods are stored and will need to be shipped out on. Once that bridge is done, retailers can be onboarded. Retailers will not onboard with the network directly. They will onboard with a seller application. And certainly for smaller retailers, we don't anticipate they will have their own application. So they'll work through an entity who is bringing that application to a large number of retailers as a service. The next question from Adnan Sheikh. Do we have to register with ONDC separately to be enabled to the network? So yes, the buyer and the seller application will have to be registered. And then behind those two, so buyers will be registered with the buyer application and the buyer application registered with ONDC. Likewise, sellers will be registered with the seller application and the seller application is registered with ONDC. So on ONDC, the buyer application and the seller application talk to each other. And then outside of this interaction are the buyers and sellers. As you sign up for onboarding, then we can walk you through more details.
But adding one more thing, Shireesh was saying that, like you announced about the hackathon, the details are probably you can post it on in the chat platform.
We've not spoken about the hackathon. That's the next section. So I'm just answering the question.
You're going to come. Okay, cool. Yeah, done. Fantastic. Yeah.
Key considerations for e-commerce, Rahul Khona. Key considerations for e-commerce applications to keep in mind while. I'm not sure, Rahul, what the question is. So please do write to us on the email provided, and we will come back with the detailed answer.
Only one thing I'll add it is, like, if their applications are ONDC protocol enabled, for which the details are available and we can give the assistance. And that way, your applications will become immediately visible once you complete this, the interface, and which is not a very complex effort. It can be done probably in a few weeks' time. So that's a broad answer. Then for the specifics, you can come reach across to us and we'll give you hand holding. Good.
For a non-e-commerce seller, is there a seller panel available to manage seller listings? So that will have to be part of the seller application. And whoever has built that application will then onboard a seller and explain how that works. Keen to participate in this payments, digital credit advisory experience that can be leveraged. So yes, we do anticipate that either the buyer or the seller application would be in a position to accept payment of the product being purchased. And so any sort of payment experience can be made available to either side application to enhance the experience either of the seller, of the buyer, or the buyer, depending on the case.
There is a question about the fintech companies, which I said, asking, of course, there are some other fintech companies who are expecting that, probably adding one dimension of commerce, because at the end of it, fintech is about payment, commerce is about buying services, or selling services. So they believe that there are ways in which they can marry them together as a larger common platform. So some other people have even started thinking. So we believe that kind of innovation would happen from e-commerce company on one side or on the fintech company on the other side.
Okay. Question from Siju Narayan on a certain homogeneity is expected in terms of product service infrastructure in order to create the seamlessness that ONDC is seeking to establish. Who stipulates this common minimum data structure? Sujith, you want to take this up?
Sure. Good point there. I think a couple of things. One, there is a certain data structure which allows anybody to communicate a catalog of their seller across the network to the buyer on the buyer platform. And there's a way for the buyer to communicate their search or the intent of what they're looking for. However, in terms of homogeneity, I'm assuming the question is also about standardization of, let's say, product codes and all that across a diverse set of sellers. That's a discussion that standardization perhaps is not right now being envisaged, because I think one of the things that the network is trying to do is to recognize diversity. At the same time, for the efficiency of discovery and all that, there is a possibility in future that as a network, we all agree that, hey, some of these are so common and some of these are fairly, branded and structured in terms of commodity. There could be a possibility as an opportunity for somebody to standardize and make it available as a lookup service on the network to drive that. Whether ONDC itself should do it or somebody else will try and do that without enforcing one standard on everybody. I think those are some of the discussions that we will go through as we evolve. So communication is standardized, but product standardization or standardization of how the catalog should be designed or defined is not something that I think as an idea we would like to encourage, because the fact that diversity is important. A single store catalog to a multi-store, multi-catalog, nested catalogs. There are so many varieties. The idea is to recognize that and not to over-standardize and exclude the players from adopting that. So that's pretty much the kind of principles in our thinking. So homogeneity is not translating into full standardization as a short response. Yeah.
Will seller get access, a question from Sandeep Jabal, will seller get access to historical transaction of customer from other seller so that seller can offer better relevant services? No. So a seller and the seller application will have a bilateral understanding on the data between that is flowing to the network from that seller through the seller application. And it'll have to be a decision made by that seller to make their data available to other sellers or not. That's not going to be a ONDC requirement or an ONDC declared principle. It could be that, let's say, a seller application may make that as a voluntarily kind of triggered service where all merchants agree to share with each other. And if that is the agreement, then yes, that would be possible. But it will not be something that ONDC will either ask or require. This will have to be bilaterally agreed.
Shireesh, just one point. Shireesh,
yeah,
one point. You should also mention about the open data protocol that we're working on. That might allow sharing of some data, which is available with one seller to other sellers, but it will not be like transactional level data. It will be anonymized data and it will be aggregated in some form.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Who owns? Please distinguish between all the technical questions, Ranjit. When we share the presentation, we will share the links to where all the technical information is available. So that will be available once you get the presentation as well. Question from Sanjeev Gupta: distinguish between sellers and seller apps. So if you remember the illustration I did of Vijay buying atta from Gupta Kirana store. Now, Gupta Kirana store is a physical store which has shelves that are stocked with products and maybe a small store at the back. That's a physical location. So Gupta Kirana store is a seller, but he's a physical location. When a buyer called Vijay through Paytm serves a search on the network, there needs to be an application that knows, first of all, Gupta Kirana store exists, that is in a position to respond to an atta query, and that he has inventory. And in that inventory, there is catalog information available of brands of atta and prices of atta, so that they can be responded to that query, so that the buyer application that brought the query can present those options to Vijay. So that application that allows the network to know what Gupta Kirana stores has and be able to serve those options to Vijay, that application will be the seller application. And so seller application is what allows the physical inventory to be visible to the network in a digitally recognizable form. Who owns customer data? Customer data in terms of details of which buyer is buying what, etc., will be the buyer application only. Where for other reasons of fulfillment, let's say logistics or registration of warranty, etc., that customer data will obviously be made available to the seller, because there is an additional service being provided to the customer, either in terms of delivery or in terms of warranty or other product related services that the seller can provide. So in those instances, then with customer permission, obviously that data will be made available. Otherwise, customer data will remain with the buyers. Again, we're trying to make this as much as voluntary, market requirement and market forces based, rather than a central written policy mandate based approach.
Again, just adding one more dimension. Normally, let us say that, what is the way ONDC is structured? ONDC is structured as a facilitating, enabling organization. So we have no intention to become a store of value by, aggregating data and monetize that for our own purpose. So as Shireesh explained earlier, whatever data that we will collect will be first announced and published and a consensus generated, and that only for the purpose of the healthy functioning of the network, as well as broader intelligence to be made available to all the network participants so that they can run their business better. And that is based on a certain consensus. That is one fundamental difference from any, independent siloed platform, because they have a, shareholder commitment of maximizing their value for themselves. And that's a big difference in an open network, which is facilitated by an agency like ONDC. So that once you appreciate that principle, then you will be able to sort of figure out most of this kind of answers to most of these kind of questions.
Then the next two questions from Hari Kaul, Sanjeev Gupta was kind enough to answer, so I will take that as addressed. Hari, you also had an observation regarding the BHIM app, and we have noted that feedback. Thank you for your comment. Then, what is the difference between this and, say, an Amazon or Alibaba marketplace from Geronimo Almeida? So I hope we were able to explain that in the case of a marketplace like Amazon, the merchant and the buyer have to be registered both on Amazon to be able to complete the transaction. What is different here is that the buyer could be brought to the network by one platform and the seller could be brought to the platform by quite another platform. So, for example, tomorrow there could be, RAI could help create a seller application for all its members to be able to make their catalogs visible, right? Now, all they would have done is brought the merchants and catalogs to the network. And let's take from the case I illustrated, Paytm bringing buyers to the network, right? So you have Paytm buyers buying from RAI application-based RAI members to the RAI application. So in this, the difference really is that different entities are bringing components of e-commerce to the marketplace. But for the end buyer, the experience is no different. And for the end seller, hopefully the experience is better because of being able to operate on their own terms and conditions and in the way they would like to make their selling services available.
And adding one more dimension, that will also mean more broader participation. For example, let's say today there is an entity who's got a large consumer base, but they don't have any seller base at all. They are having a consumer base probably for some other business. It might be for a wallet service, or it could be a fintech service, or it could be for any, or it could be a telephony service. Okay, but if they have to set up today, if they have to participate in an e-commerce today, they have to worry about having a large cross-section of sellers who are tied up to their network, logistics, and the whole sort of thing. Whereas tomorrow they'll say, okay, now that I have this broad set of customers who are using my application for many services, I'm adding commerce onto it. So it is only the access that they've added, but the sellers and the logistics and the associated services are all available in the network for him to sort of make use of it for the to help his clients. So that way, you would also see the broader participation coming in, and specialization coming in, and innovation coming in. So in that, so that's a one fundamental difference from siloed platform kind of approach, which is trying to which will have to naturally, even if I'm there, I'll do the same thing to maximize the value onto that one platform only. Whereas here it is creating a democratic marketplace where everybody can come and participate.
Next question.
Come in here, Shireesh. Just to add on the example that you took of, say, example of a RAI platform, right?
Yeah.
In this case, what happens is any seller who's registered on the RAI platform is not discoverable by any buyer side platform. So while Shireesh took the example of Paytm, tomorrow, if you even if it's a PhonePe or a Google or a WhatsApp, any buyer side platform, the same seller only coming through one platform gets discovered across. From an administrative overhead perspective, it's reducing the administrative burden on the sellers to be present on multiple platforms, because just being on one ONDC enabled platform.
I think there was a lot of break in between.
Yes, what Vibhor was trying to add is that if the RAI platform, let's say, was registered on the existing marketplaces, then they would only be visible to buyers from that marketplace, and the RAI platform would have to register on every individual marketplace in order for the merchants to be visible. In the case of ONDC, they just need to register once. And no matter which buyer application is bringing buyers to the network, whether it is Paytm, whether it is PhonePe, whether it is WhatsApp, whether it is Google Pay, any entity that is bringing buyers to the network, every single one with a single registration from RAI, all of those applications will be able to find the RAI merchants without any additional administrative effort. So once you register once on ONDC, then any ONDC buyer on any ONDC registered buyer application is able to discover you.
Okay, it means one-stop shop.
Yes, you just need to register once. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Shireesh.
Question from Sarfraz Miller. When a customer is searching for a product with a generic description on a buyer platform and there are multiple sellers servicing similar products, which seller will feature on top? So the network will serve all the matches, and the buyer application will have to determine how they get presented to the buyer for whatever experience they want to create. Today, buyer applications make choices in terms of providing premium space to sponsored brands, and then some sort of organic search hierarchy for the rest. They also offer filters in terms of rating or brand choices, or other features. So depending on what experience the buyer application wants to present, they will create any or more of these filters and display mechanisms. It's entirely the buyer application decision.
Similar question, Shireesh. That you mentioned the example of that Atta, and immediately there were two options, and one Gupta ji was on the top.
Right.
Now, who decides?
Not on top. So we said two options are presented. Now, whether Gupta Kirana store is on top or whether the other option is on top is a decision that the buyer application will have to make. And now with two is easy. Two will show up simultaneously. But let's say if there are 200, then the buyer application will have to determine either to present all 200 and the person scrolls through, and they will have to determine which ones go on page 1, page 2, etc., or provide filters by which the person can do it. Now, the protocol does provide for a seller identification code. And so Gupta Kirana store, for example, could share that QR code with its regular customers saying, hey, whenever you're on any ONDC buying application, just use this QR code and then I will be the one who will be supplying. So you can direct that, your own customers to your own selling channel.
Adding one more dimension is that we expect that the buyers' applications will provide a very smart filters to the end client, so that it is not that what they choose, and we expect the buyer platform to give interesting choices for the person to sort of put this filter condition. For example, I say, I want it to be delivered in the next 1 hour. I wanted the price anything less than so much. So, and I want it to be only a branded good or an unbranded good. So those kind of we expect, because we are opening up the, innovation from the buyer side and bringing variety of clients to, variety of entities to bring their buyer application. We would see these kind of buyer application with these kind of unique features coming, which will be relevant for the kind of public. Even again, if I just add one more example, let's say that, for example, there is a application called MyGate, which is sort of deciding on the admissions into the condominiums. They may decide that I'm going to create a specialized app for an addition into my MyGate for all the residents in this community to identify regular groceries within the next who can deliver in the next 2 hours time. So those kind of a special filter might be there for somebody in the community may use it that for. So so what we are expecting is to see these kind of smart filters and search criterions getting developed and made it available by different kind of service providers to meet with their particular kind of customer base whom they are building up, as against very few of them having a sort of customer base where those entities completely decide for themselves whom they should sort of shortlist for their clients.
Okay.
Moving on to the next question by Adnan Sheikh. You mentioned that currently it's Bengaluru and NCR that's going live. What about a Mumbai-based seller who can reach out to customers in Bangalore and NCR and also have an established customer base earlier? So yes, this is actually a national network, and anyone can order from anyone. The reason why we mention a couple of cities is that right at the start of the presentation, I spoke about the very low penetration of e-commerce. Because of the nature of constraints and especially smaller players finding it difficult. So the large scale e-commerce kind of a solution at a scale level which operates from remote buyers and sellers will also be possible on ONDC. But when we bring attention to a couple of cities is that we are putting special efforts to ensure that there are hyper-local solutions, if not in the entire city, at least in consistent pockets. So, for example, if I were to take Bengaluru, it wouldn't make sense if I have buyers in Malleshwaram and merchants in Koramangala for grocery delivery. We want to make sure buyers and sellers from the same locality are available so that transactions can be completed. Likewise, you don't want buyers in Pritampura and sellers in Janakpuri in Delhi, that you want them in the same locality. So while in theory, anyone can buy from anywhere, so a Mumbai-based seller can sell items to somebody in Bangalore and NCR, but that's possible even today. And where we are putting special attention and focus is to ensure that there are hyper-local, closely connected models also coming in addition to the remote buying one. So that's the intent behind the highlight of the two cities. Will ONDC have a role in the order? No, I think I've already answered that. Divya has shared a few links then to Adnan's question. How does the visibility mechanism work for people to see on multiple platforms with respect to the visibility properties that a platform has? Okay, if this has to do with order of showing products, Adnan, then I think we've answered it. If it's different, then please rephrase the question so then we understand the distinction from the one that's been answered. Can fintech register in network to provide lending facility to seller who has given approval? Rajan, let me answer it, and I'll let Koshy and others also jump in case they have additional thoughts to add. So to the extent that fintech can also be thought of as a domain, there is a loan product that can be sold like any other product. Yes, fintech can then become a domain where the fintech entity is a seller application and the lenders are registered with it as quote-unquote sellers, in which case a loan product can be bought. In addition, if there is then meant to be off-network activity, which is the network is only seeing goods and services being brought, but a seller of goods is looking for lending from fintech, then that fintech entity does not really need to register on ONDC. But as I mentioned with the OCAN example, that two open networks can talk to each other, and with permission of the one seeking loan, data can be made available to the other network for purposes of processing that. I don't know if Koshy or Sujith or Supriyo, you have anything to add. Otherwise, we'll move to the next question.
I think Shireesh, you answered,
Okay.
specifically in both ways, especially the open network enabling the transaction to be made available for the banking sector to form as a basis. And those kind of, when we have these kind of open network, this become possible. And those are the kind of enabling linkages that we will be bringing about as a part of the larger ecosystem development.
Okay. Next is a technical question. Are the digital contracts on blockchain or some other technology? Sujith?
So I think I did provide a response, but the digital contracts are essentially a dual digitally signed order object exchanged over the protocol. So both the buyer platform and the seller platform signing on the order so that they're agreeing to the order and the terms that are, kind of encapsulated in that order. So there's no blockchain or any other technology in case you are leading to any kind of consensus and other algorithms. It's very simple, dual digitally signed, which is kind of ITAC supported. Either parties can have a copy of that contract, which is signed by the other party. So that pretty much becomes the way to enable that the copies are available with the parties involved, because the transactions, as I mentioned earlier, are largely bilateral. Should this contract copy be also stored somewhere in a third party, ledger, whether it's distributed blockchain-based ledger or something else? Those are not being envisaged as of now. I don't think we see a need for that. But if there is such a requirement as the network grows and evolves, maybe we can consider that. But as of now, nothing has been envisaged on that front.
Next question from Ranjit Satyanath is on: do sellers and retailers need to share inventory information with ONDC? You need to share catalog and the fact about items being available, because when a search comes, you want to respond only if the item is with you. But what quantity of each item is a choice you can choose to or not choose to. You will observe whether it is products on marketplaces or airline tickets on airline portals, they tend to tell you only 2 left or only 5 left, in order for people who are wavering on the decision, that they could probably then plunge in and say, hey, let me buy it before it completely goes. So that's a voluntary one that is not required, but certainly you ought to share availability. So inventory information only from availability standpoint, whether something is or is not, so that then you respond correctly to a search query. Buyer application collects money. Again, question from Ranjit. Is settlement also part of ONDC? We are working on the settlement policies. We know that money can be collected in one of 3 places. It will be collected as a prepayment by the buyer application. It can be collected as a prepayment by the seller application, or it can be collected in the event of cash on delivery by the delivery entity that delivers the product. We also recognize that the cash collection can be in different ways. It can be full payment, it can be EMI based, etc. So we're just working through all the use cases, and we will share with all the participants who've expressed interest for their feedback on what the settlement is. ONDC itself will not be doing the settlement, but ONDC will establish the principles around which the settlements ought to take place. And when network participants become part of the network, they will digitally or otherwise sign on acceptance that these are the terms by which they are willing to work with us. Technically, a marketplace like Amazon, can leverage ONDC layer and augmented marketplace to involve sellers not on the Amazon network. Yes, Siju, that is correct. Currently, a platform has one kind of transaction between the platform's own buyers to platform's own merchants. And being part of ONDC opens up two additional kinds of transactions. So the platform's own buyers can buy from any other merchant that's not on their network. That's one additional kind of transaction. The second is buyers from any other platform can buy from the merchants registered on their platform. So two additional kinds of transactions open up. And we certainly anticipate that given the financial situation in many of these marketplaces, for them to have the opportunity of additional transactions on exactly the same buyer and seller base that they already have, they will actually welcome the opportunity to participate. That's at least our expectation. So we've been very excited. I'm really happy to see the interaction, the questions, and willingness to learn. Always been especially energized by RAI's partnership with ONDC right from the beginning, Raj himself and everyone else we've interacted with. So we're looking forward to your members really becoming an enthusiastic participants and proponents and flag bearers of what ONDC can offer.
Thank you, Shireesh. With this, are we going? Yeah, Kumar, you want to say something?
Just one request, considering that there are quite a few people on this and there could be more questions coming up, if we can establish a communication methodology so that if there are more questions or if they have to get in touch with somebody, I think the ONDC team can tell how does a person reach out to ONDC, how do they get to know any information, and how do they really connect?
Yes. So when we share the PPT for sharing with all, we will also share connections with our Slack channel, which is our ongoing interaction. And all the entities who then start working with us, we also include them in the community call, which will also be shared with them.
Sure. Shireesh, are we left with some other part of the presentation, or? Yes.
I briefly wanted to talk about the hackathon and the hackathon. We don't need to bring the PPT up. I'll just announce it, and when we share the PPT, the details will be there. Okay. So the idea is that given that the principle is unbundling and interoperability, one component, of course, is to ensure that all the various entities, the buyer application, seller application, logistics, are able to complete the handshake of information for a particular transaction and confirm that they're able to receive the request, respond to the request, get the confirmation back, and that round trip is completed. We did that integration sprint with a few participants who've been working with us, but now the opportunity in the January hackathon is to do it with a much larger set. So one hackathon set of activities have to do with this round trip completion. The other set of challenges in the hackathon is around innovation that are about improving the experience for the one part. So, digitizing catalogs or providing Indic language support, etc. And one part also challenges around expanding and improving the protocol itself. So we have a certain starting protocol on the basis of which we will begin operations, but in the hackathon will be a second opportunity. Divya shared the links, and you will see the links also come through in the PP that comes through. So register with us, and importantly, based on the sprint, we got the feedback from the participants that knowing the protocols before and knowing what the challenges were before enabled them to get started very fluently when the hackathon started. So we have organized masterclasses. We had one set yesterday, and then the next set is on the 4th of January. So your technical teams can join that, where we will walk through the protocol in much greater detail. We will explain what the challenges are, so that when the hackathon begins on 7th of January, there would have been time for you to internally discuss and get ready and make sure the right resources are present. So that was the only additional bit that was left to share. And that will be in the PPT, and the links have been shared on the chat by the way as well.
Sure. Also, once we get the PPT, we'll share it again with all of you, on the present at today's masterclass. Shireesh, anything else that needs to be covered for this masterclass?
No, we've covered everything that we intended to share.
Sure. Kumar, any final closing remarks from your end, please?
I think this has been quite an interactive session, and to me, it kind of opened up some more questions and some more answers. It's a learning process. I'm glad that the people who've joined in. If there is something that's got left out, I guess we can still wait for 2 minutes for people to raise any other questions or any other comments. People on the call, Koshy and Sujith and Shireesh, everybody has kind of added a lot of value to all of us, and I'm sure that things will get added more. One thing that all of you need to remember is that this whole thing has been created exactly like RAI. It's a Section 8 company. It's a not-for-profit company. So do not get worried about whether they are going to tend to work for one company to the detriment of other company. So be open, be contributories rather than try to throw stones. And I think we will be able to create a fantastic ecosystem within India. And I'm sure this will become the kind of ecosystem across the world. So we'll just give everybody a kind of little bit of time, Nitesh, before we shut this down or take things further. And of course, Koshy and others can add. In the
meantime, Koshy sir, your final remarks, please.
I think we have talked too much. I should only say thank you for doing this. And I'm again exhorting the members to participate in hackathon, to register ourselves, register in this network, either as a seller application or a seller, or some of you are technology service providers to sort of develop innovative solutions to sort of make it relevant to your colleagues. And that's a big message that I wanted to share with you.
Thank you. Shireesh, would you like to, you saw and answered all the questions, most of them. So what's your final comment?
I am just thrilled to be working with RAI. I love the enthusiasm, and I'm really looking forward to many of you, if not all, participating and coming live with us. Forget participation. I would love to see many of you be live with us when we go live by second half of January.
Thanks, Shireesh. Sujith, you are there. We can hear you also. Your final words.
Thank you so much, Hitesh. This has been an absolutely delightful conversation. I know things were a little technical at some point, and I'm not too sure if I've done justice to your time. Happy to answer the questions, but phenomenal participation. The line of inquiry, the questions were all great. I think this is exactly the kind of participation we would need, actually, even in the ONDC adoption. Look forward to having all your valuable insights help shape this whole initiative better. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sujith. I think with this, we don't have any more questions as of now. But this is not the end. This is just the beginning. As you know, Kumar and Koshy sir, Shireesh and Sujith mentioned, we will have a long way to go. And the hackathon is on 5th, Shireesh?
7th, 8th, 9th.
The hackathon is on 7th, and the details have been mentioned in the in the chat. And we will also share the details with you over email. So once again, with this, I would like to thank each and every one of you who has come here today. In fact, in next 10 minutes, we'll be completing 2 hours, and we had not anticipated that it's going to be so long. And I am sure that, these are just the tip of the iceberg questions. But like Koshy sir, Shireesh and Sujith mentioned, that once you come live in person, with your teams, etc., we can get into the details of it. So we look forward for the hackathon participation, and we'll stay in touch. We'll be communicating with you at a regular interval. With this number, we are definitely looking at more and more retailers, the tech service providers, etc., joining our our group here. And till then, next time, thank you very much. Thank you, team ONDC, and thank you everyone who has been a part of this today's masterclass. See you again. Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.